Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Marriage Monday. My name's Aaron, this is my wife Michelle. We're just trying to, every week, have some discussions to help to cultivate better marriages that last a lifetime.
And this week, we are talking about conflict. Dun, dun, dun.
But more specifically, healthy conflict.
Yes, healthy conflict. And conflict is something that all marriages, relationships in general deal with. And we can either have two spectrums. We have the unhealthy conflict side versus healthy conflict and what it can produce. Either side can produce something. And so we want to cultivate better marriages. We want to make sure our marriages are healthy, and conflict is a part of becoming healthy. And so we're going to talk about all the different things that we do that maybe are unhealthy, but then we're also going to talk about what are some tips, what are some ways that we can have some really healthy conflict within our marriages. And I think it's important to know that we've all grown up in different places. We've all been through different things in life. And so we're going to approach conflict differently. Your spouse is not going to be the same at conflict that you're going to be. And so I think learning each other in that will help unlock some amazing things within your marriage, help you go further with your family, with your marriage, than maybe you would if you were always in that unhealthy conflict mode. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive into it. And yeah, it's going to be good.
So just as like a quick disclaimer before we do this, there's a big difference between conflict and abuse. Okay, so if you're in a situation where you're being abused in any way, whether it's physical or other, that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
If you're being abused, then you need to get help from somebody. This is more just everyday fights and squabbles and things like that. But if you're in an unsafe situation, you need to make sure you get help from a professional, whoever that may be. Okay?
It's good. Did you just say squabble?
Yeah, squabbles. Squabbles. Everyone has squabbles.
He's so much better at English than I am sometimes. He finds all those cool words. Yeah. All right, so the first one that we're going to talk about we're talking about unhealthy conflict and what are some of the things that we do that can be unhealthy in our conflict with our spouse. And so the first one that we're going to talk about is the silent treatment. The silent treatment. I will be the first to say that is one that I have used many a time. And it's, the one where you're so mad at your spouse and they did something you didn't like, and you are going to show them and you're going to make them feel bad, make them feel the way they treated you by not talking to them. By punishing them by going away and going up to your room, not talking to them, or doing something like dishes or whatever, and you're not going to talk to them, you're not going to tell them, you're going to make them squander. And for some reason that makes us feel better, to make them feel that way. So that's part of conflict that I have done before many times. But Aaron, I think it'd be good for them to hear from you, from like the spouse's perspective of that's getting the silent treatment. Like, what does it do to you when that happens?
Yeah, I think it can be really hard. I think that it can add to like a lot of frustration to a situation. You might have some situations where you say something in the moment and don't even realize that you made them mad, or you don't even realize you hurt their feelings or did something wrong. And then next thing you know, you're just getting ignored, or they're just being really kind of cold and distant. So it can be kind of confusing and frustrating sometimes to be like, did I do something, or is this caused by something else? Are you mad at me? Are you mad at something that happened at work or whatever? It can just be really like hard to navigate through that problem if the other person's not willing to talk to you.
And I think it's important that highlight what you said about like, you didn't realize maybe sometimes what you even did to cause that silent treatment, and they're not telling you what you did. And so it's just creating this unhealthy like cycle of conflict that it doesn't really get anywhere. A lot of times you've even like wasted the whole day because you're just doing that.
You're fighting about something, but you haven't actually fought about it.
Yes, and like where you can waste that whole day, but yet I think that there's a better way to do that, and like just nip it in the bud and not have to waste a whole day, but get on from there. And so we're going to talk about more of that like later, of tips that you can do to get past all of that. But the silent treatment, it truly is
not good.
Not good. It's one of those things that we use though. Yeah.
Yeah, another big one that kind of goes along with the silent treatment in the fact that it doesn't actually deal with anything is denial. You know, it's I'm fine, it's good, nothing, no, I'm good.
The text message.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so I think that can be just as bad as the silent treatment because, again, you're not working through it. You're not, someone might even not know something's wrong if you say, babe, are you mad at me? What's going on? I'm fine. Okay, are you really fine? Or do we need to talk about something? No, it's good. Okay, so now for me, it's like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to take you at your word and just trust that you said you're fine, so you're fine? Or do I have to just keep digging and try to find out, okay, you said you're fine, so what does that mean you're mad at me for?
Yeah, and our spouses, they are wanting to fix. Like, especially guys, they're like, let's fix the problem. Like, let's get to it. And when you're not giving them any clarity on what the problem is, and you're just in denial, or you're like, I'm fine, like, leave it there. I mean, they're a lot of times taking you at your word, you know, like, this is what I gotta do. And then when something truly isn't fine, but you're saying that, and then they realize that, or they understand that, it like, you lose that trust with your spouse of like, I can trust what you're saying to me is accurate. And they ultimately, I think they want to help fix it. You know, I think, so if we can be clear with them and get past the I'm fine, that can like actually open up to a better dialogue with your spouse. So just get past that. Getting past that can help lead to some better results. And then the last one that we want to talk about is the explosion. Yeah, the explosion. The explosion is something that, I mean, everyone has dealt with in some way or another. We've all been there, where we are literally just not dealing with conflict at all, and we're just pushing it down deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then it comes to, you know, they didn't take the trash out that night, your spouse, and then you just explode on them. You go crazy, talking loudly, you know, just like, and that simple thing, it truly isn't about not taking the trash out.
Yeah.
It's about all of those years of digging deeper with whatever that was, like pushing it down, and then it just all explodes out, and that can really create some collateral damage within your marriage with your spouse. So so the explosion is something that can be very detrimental, and
it can be really unfair too. You know, like hey, you're mad because of things have been stressful at work, or things are stressful with your family, or you know, anything that it could be that like is the root problem of why you're so like tense. But then one little thing that I do when you get home and you're gonna blow up on me, like that's not fair to me to have to deal with like all that explosion and that rage or whatever it is over this small thing just because the big things haven't been dealt with. And I think that there's like several reasons sometimes why people can get into those situations where they do kind of blow up like that. I think one reason is just not dealing with stuff like we said. You know, it's like, man, someone at work makes me so mad every day, and I'm working on this project and I'm so frustrated, and so now when I get home I'm going to take that out on you. I think another one that you see a lot is when you have a spouse that feels like they're not being heard or they're not being seen. So maybe you have a husband that just isn't willing to listen, and a wife that has things she's trying to share with him. And then next thing you know, you're blowing up about crazy stuff, and it's really just because you feel like that's the only way that you can get heard. So now it's like this big overreaction about everything, or it's this big production, or it's, you know, I'm going to pack my bags and I'm going to leave and stuff like that over something that's probably pretty small relatively. But because the other spouse has made them feel that like they're not being heard, or they don't take them seriously, or they don't care what they think, that person says, the only way for me to get this dealt with, this thing that's bothering me, is if I turn it into this giant thing. You know? And
we as humans, we learn what are the things with our spouse or in that relationship that really communicates to them in a positive way, and like what can get results in a positive way. But we also learn what are the results, you know, in a negative way, and or in a way that, you know, you can be heard, you know, in that way. And so we learn those things, but it's all based on what we're experiencing from our relationship with our spouse. And that's, we're responding in that way. And that's how we do as human beings, you know, as learning that. Another thing I think it's important to remember is that being angry, or the emotion of anger, is not something that needs to be negative, or like, as far as like, you can never be angry. God actually created anger, and it's like an emotion that he says in his Bible. The Bible says, be angry, but do not sin.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to remember, or to recognize, that anger is actually something that can be useful and helpful to produce good results if we wield it in the right way. And if we don't, the Bible says, do not sin. And so if we use anger in the wrong way, then it can become detrimental. But it's all in how you wield it. It's all in how you are using your anger to produce good results in conflict or in anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Another kind of unhealthy trait of conflict can be sarcasm. So this is probably the one that I do the most. You know, sarcasm is just being passive aggressive, basically. It's, instead of saying what bothers me, you either try to make a joke out of it, or you try to kind of downplay it, or you try to like not actually deal with the problem, but just kind of say little like cutting things that might like kind of hurt your spouse or things like that. I think sometimes that just comes from like not having the skills to deal with stuff in a healthy way, like not having that kind of like maturity to say like, hey, can we just stop for a second? I kind of have a problem. Can we work on this? Can we deal with this? Instead, you just kind of make little comments. You know, it's kind of like when you're talking to someone and they don't listen to you, and you're like, oh, good talk. Okay, well, see you later. Like that kind of thing. You know, instead of saying, hey, you know, I'm trying to tell you something and I feel like you're kind of distracted. Is this a bad time? Can you just listen to me for a few minutes so I can get this answer I need? But instead you're like, good talk, and you stomp away. That is never going to be something that does anything healthy in your relationship. It's not going to help the problem. It's not going to make your spouse want to work through things with you. It's just going to make people just get more tense and just kind of annoyed with each other. Yeah, especially for someone like me who's very like gullible, also very like, you know, believing, and doesn't always get sarcasm. I mean, sometimes I do. I've lived with him a little longer now that I'm getting it, but it does really make you feel like, you know, they're being truthful in what they're saying, but they're truly not being truthful in it, and there's something else there. And so it makes you try to have to figure out, you know, all of that. And so it becomes like an unhealthy way of communicating to each other. Definitely. Another one that we have on our list is the side of just ignoring your spouse and in whatever they're saying to you or whatever that is, ignoring them, not listening to them, and just going and doing whatever you wanted to do in the first place, just doing it. Yeah. And that is just one thing that, man, that's tough. Yeah. Because then your spouse is left with, well, you know what, I can't do anything about it. I have no voice in this, I have no say in this, and we're not a team. That's kind of what that says. It is exactly. Your spouse. This is not a partnership, this is me, and I'll do whatever the heck I want. Yep, it's like you're a one-man team or one-woman team, whatever that is. So that's a big one that's just, it's not good. Yeah, and kind of the last thing we wanted to bring up for unhealthy things is I think that this probably happens even more with younger couples and people that are kind of like just starting out on their own and things like that. So listen up, young couples. Yeah, young people, listen. Don't bring your parents or your siblings or your coworkers or your friends or your Facebook followers into your fights. You know, how many times have you been with your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whatever, wife, and you get in a big heated fight about something that's probably actually pretty stupid, but the two of you are like really worked up about it, and then the next minute you're fine. You guys are like, oh, we worked it out, we're good. You know, so many people will take those like moments where they're just like really hot and passionate and angry about something, and they'll go and they'll talk to their parents or they'll talk to their siblings, and they'll be like, oh, he's such a jerk, he does all this and he does this and he does this. But then in that next moment when you feel better and you're fine and you're lovey-dovey again, it might be easy for you to move on, but a lot of times it's not easy for them to move on. You know, so now you feel fine, but your parents are still hung up on the fight you guys had and the things that happened between you. And they're like, oh, you know, he's being mean to my little girl and things like that. But really, a lot of times, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of times when you're heated like that and you're really emotional, you're probably only telling your side of the story.
Yep.
And you're probably exaggerating, like we all do it. So so this thing where, you know, he did this little thing, now you're telling your parents about this giant thing that happened that really wasn't what it was. And you have just as much blame in the situation because you were acting crazy too. But you're not going to tell your parents that. You're going to say, I was doing nothing and he came in and, you know. So it's like something where, you know, if you're going to be married to someone, you're going to spend your whole life together.
Yeah.
Like over the years, that can really start to add up, and you can really start to paint them in a bad light to people that are around you and have people really think wrong things about that person because you aren't keeping that in your relationship. And I think that, you know, again, we're not talking about abuse or anything like that, but we're talking about little fights and things like that. Just, you're going to really ruin trust between the two of you if anytime you and I have a problem, you're running to your mom or your dad or your sister or your friend, and you're putting all our business out there, or you're on Facebook talking about, you know, how bad things are. It's going to really break trust in your relationship, and it's going to be something that is really going to build up bitterness and just things like that are really hard to work through in the future.
Yeah, and family can be sticky. Family can be drama, and we all know that. Like, and family sometimes can love the drama.
Yeah.
But we have to guard against that because we cannot go any further if we don't. And I think about, like, your spouse is you're a united team. And so behind the scenes, behind closed doors, hash it out, have good conflict, you know, be in disagreement. But when it comes to, okay, now we've done that, we've got boundaries. When we're around our family, when I'm talking to my family, I'm going to be talking the highest of my husband. I'm going to be, you know, making sure that I'm guarding my mouth, guarding my tongue, that I'm not talking negative about him, because that adds up over time, and you can't, it's harder to take that back, you know, and to make that, you know, better if you're continually doing that. And so it's important. Some of those things are so good for the longevity of marriage. Yeah,
and there's a quote that says, trust is gained in drops but lost in buckets. And I think this is a big opportunity. You know, you gain trust slowly over time. It's just drips and drips and drips. Every time you do something, you prove to someone that you're faithful and you're trustworthy. But the minute that you break that trust, you just dump that bucket out, right? And then you have to slowly let it drip back in. So protecting that trust with your spouse is huge.
So we talked about some of the ways that, you know, we can be unhealthy with conflict, but let's talk about tips for, or the benefits for healthy conflict. Like, what are some of the benefits? Why would we want to have healthy conflict? And what can that be good for our marriage or for, you know, future marriage, all of that stuff. So the first one is just making well-rounded decisions on how we're going to move forward together. And I think that is a huge part of, you know, you have your perspective, your spouse has their perspective, you have your life experience, they have their life experience. And if you can both come together and then come to a healthy compromise with your conflict, then you can go much further and have a well-rounded decision moving forward than if you were just to get your own way and do your own thing. You're only going to get so far. So I think that's important. And I think especially when it comes to raising your kids, you know, anything like that in life, if you are only doing your perspective and your own way on it, then you're only going to get so far. But if you can actually talk about it and talk about, hey, this is how I was growing up, or this is how I learned growing up. Okay, how can we put this together? How can we make this better? And, you know, let's talk it through, let's hash it out, but then let's come to that healthy agreement compromise. Your kids, or whatever you're pouring that you know, into, is going to have such a better, well-rounded result in their lives even. So think about how that even trickles down from there. It can just be healthy all around.
Yeah, and I think kind of going along that same way and talking about trust is just, you can get a better understanding of each other when you have healthy conflict. If all I ever do is say, okay, whatever you want, then if I'm just trying to do that to avoid conflict, then I never really see why you think that way. Why are you making these decisions? Like, what is your thought process? How did you get to the decision that this is what was best? And so that's where just having that open conversation and maybe having to do a little bit of disagreeing and explaining ourselves and things like that can really help the other person to maybe even trust you more, because they see, okay, yeah, she thought this through. She feels like this because of this. I understand now. That makes it a lot easier for me to trust you in the future on these kind of decisions, because I understand, where you're coming from.
Yeah, and it goes both ways in that.
Yeah.
So, and then it just builds trust.
Yeah.
Between us. We've already talked about trust, but truly trust is a foundational thing for your marriage, that you see the motives, you see the process, you see, all of that, and then you're more at ease in that, outcome from that conflict. Okay, so we've talked about unhealthy conflict. We've talked about the benefits of healthy conflict. Now let's just talk about some tips that can really help you to have good conflict within your marriage. And so the first one that we're going to talk about is don't be afraid to talk it out. Don't be afraid to talk it out. Just do it. Just find that place, find that time to just talk about what you're feeling in an environment where it's just you and your spouse and you're working through it. So don't be intimidated.
And I think kind of, the flip side of that is be a good listener. It's really unfair if you have someone who's trying to make your relationship better and they're like working up the courage to try to like initiate this healthy conflict and try to work something out. And you can't be a good listener and hear them out and listen to them through the process and really be open-minded to them with whatever you guys might be talking about at the moment.
Yeah. And the next one is be a safe place for your spouse. Cultivate that, make that a safe place for them to be able to open up to you and to have that healthy dialogue, that healthy conflict with each other. And I know for me personally, like, I'm not a big like yeller. I'm not gonna like get in Aaron's face and like punch him out or whatever that might be. But when I'm angry, when I am upset with something, I cry. So crying is a big way that I show that I'm upset with something. Or
happy, or sad, or scared.
Anything, really.
Yeah.
It just comes out with tears.
Yeah.
I don't know why. That's just how I am. So Aaron has really done a great job and it's taken practice. It's taken learning each other. It's not just happened overnight, but he's created this place where I can come to him and we can talk through some stuff, and I can even be crying and I can even be messy, and like, it's just, sometimes it's not pretty, but he has waited patiently, listened to what I'm saying, really heard me, and I felt like he heard me, and that in turn created this safe place. And I think it's important, like, your spouse should be that, for you. And so, but it takes, both sides in that. So be a safe place for your spouse.
So next is replace you language with I language. So I think that there's a lot of times where people get really defensive when conflict arises, because a lot of times with your spouse, it's really personal things that you're having conflict about. And so I think that it's if you come into it and if I go up to Michelle and I'm like, you never do this and you forgot this again and you're always like this, and that's just going to feel like an attack, and so that's going to make it a lot harder to get to a healthy place with it. And someone who's being attacked like that, their first thought is probably going to be to defend themselves, and they're either going to come back with, well, you do this and you do this, or they're going to shut down or something. You're not going to get anywhere productive with the fight, so things that you can do is, instead of saying you do this, replace that with hey, I have felt like this, or I was thinking this, is that correct? That can really help you to to just make sure that like you're not attacking that person and that you can kind of keep them at ease, and you're just saying, hey, I'm just sharing my side of this story. I'm not here to attack you.
Yeah, it could be like, hey babe, I feel like lately when we've been around my family that you've just been really distant, and I feel like there's something going on there, but I just don't know what, like, and how can I help you in that?
Yeah.
And as opposed to being like, hey babe, you are totally a jerk when you're around my family, and you're totally like not including in all of their stuff they're doing or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
How different does that make you feel?
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
And if you're talking about cultivating something and really growing this like safe space for healthy conflict, you know, you've got to both be able to express yourselves without trying to hurt each other, you know? So the next one is focus on the issue and not the person.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That one is like a big one, because we often connect and see the issue connected with the person.
Yeah.
But it's so important to really dig deep and separate the issue from the person. We love the person. We love our spouse. We don't love the issue that's happening. And so it's important to just separate those two to help you go into conflict in that way. So if you're really heated and you're really like ready to go into conflict and it's all about that issue and that person, you know, make sure you just take a minute and breathe before walking into that and be like, okay, what is the true issue here? Like what, and that's how I want to approach this. I don't want to make it all on the person and what they did. Yeah,
your goal for a conflict should not be that I prove that I'm a better person than you, you know, or, you know, it's not like I'm great at this and you're terrible at this and that kind of thing. You know, the goal should be we had a disagreement, we talked it through, we made compromises, and we worked it out, and we agreed on something. And unity should be more important than just winning a fight, you know? The next one is just paraphrase. So a lot of times, like I know for me, I talk a lot and I can come off really passionate, like when I'm talking about something. And I know in the past there's been times where like Michelle has felt like I was being more aggressive than I felt like I was, or she felt like I was maybe like mad about something where I wasn't mad. I just tend to talk passionately about things. And so when you paraphrase, you know, you can kind of say something back. Now, again, this is something where like your other spouse needs to just be able to be a good listener. But it's like when you say something, instead of just assuming that they meant this and that they were trying to be hurtful and they were trying to, you paraphrase it back to them and say, hey, so what I'm hearing you saying is that you don't like the way that this is happening. Is that correct? And then sometimes you might not realize, as the person talking, you might not realize that you came off that way. And so then that way you can really work on that. And that really helps you for the future too, you know, because now next time we fight about something, you might be able to say, hey, he sounds mad again, but last time we talked about this, he's not mad. And so this is just, I'm starting to understand who you are and how you're different than me.
Yeah, and it's not even just for conflict. Like this thing is like, it can be universal for any communication that you're having with your spouse. It can be communication between you and your kids, your other relationships in life. Like coming back at it is like, what I'm hearing you say is this. Yeah. And sometimes it can be just completely different because you're filtering it through what your perspective is. Yeah. They're filtering it through what their perspective is.
Sometimes you might be really surprised when you say something and in your mind you know what you mean. You might be really surprised to hear what they say back to you and how it actually was perceived.
That's so good. So good. So the last one, which is probably one of my favorites in marriage, but it can be the hardest to do sometimes, is when you've gone too far or when you've done something that hurt your spouse, ask for forgiveness. Yeah. Be quick to ask for forgiveness. Yeah. And I want to read this scripture to you. It's in Proverbs 17:9. It's so good. It says, love prospers when a fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends.
Yeah.
And your spouse should be your closest friend. Other than your relationship with God, your spouse should be your closest friend. And that there's so much importance in creating unity with your spouse.
Yeah.
In that forgiveness is a part of asking for forgiveness is a part of creating that unity. And so if you've done something wrong, if you've hurt them, if there's, whatever that might be, don't let that settle and just like not ever address it or anything like that. If you've done something wrong, there's been many times that I have, whether I've given Aaron the silent treatment or I've done something wrong in our conflict together, and I've just had to stop and put down my pride and just out of humility, out of love for him, be like, you know what? I messed up. I'm sorry for doing that. I'm sorry for being that way to you. And I feel like that has like mended so many a conflict within us. And so that is huge in, marriage.
It's going to be... can diffuse it so quick,
Yes.
You can be so worked up and say, I'm sorry, and the person's like, oh, well, I forgive you. It just can like take it down so quick.
Yeah, and it's not only just asking for forgiveness and just the act of that, but there's also the side of you actually have to change. You have to not do what you were doing. And so those two combined are just such a huge thing that will never leave your marriage over every year. There's always going to be opportunity to ask for forgiveness because we're human. We mess up. We make mistakes. We say things we don't mean. All of that is a part of marriage.
Yeah.
So
definitely. So, we know that like you're going to have fights. We all have fights. So the biggest thing is just making sure that you fight fair, and that's kind of what this has been all about. Some tips to just make sure that you're fighting fair and that you're focusing on the right things and you're doing what's needed to work through things, but also preserve your marriage and to really make it stronger.
Yeah. So that's it for today's episode. We hope that you got some stuff out of that, and we want to encourage you that if you have any tips or tools that you've had success in your marriage with conflict, write them in the comments. We want to hear about it. We want to create, this whole thing is to create a space for conversation, for growth together, and we believe that we're better together, truly. We're better and stronger when we come together and learn together. And so we hope that this was helpful for you. We encourage you, share this with your friends, share this with your family, like this. It really helps to get the word out, and this is such a huge tool for marriage and helping any relationship truly is healthy conflict and healthy resolution. And so so that's it for today. We hope you have a good one, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.